So I want to talk a bit in this video about the issue of prostitution, um, and why I believe perhaps it should be legalized. I should say this is an issue that I've changed my stance on about 5 years ago, roughly speaking. I was one of those people who said, oh, it's a terrible thing, it should be illegal, naturally. But within that time, I've contemplated some of the issues involved, and I'm now veering towards the view that it perhaps should be legal. And in this video I want to lay out the reasons why. First of all, I want to make it clear, I don't think that there's any particularly easy option with this one, and I don't think that prostitution in itself is a good thing. I think sex should be about affection, maybe if not love, at least something that's more than using your body for that purpose, sort of a trade-off. But when I look at the issues around this, I believe that there are issues that are not really raised as much as they should be. Firstly, needless to say, it varies in legality from country to country. Some countries it's completely illegal, some countries it's completely legal, and other countries, including the UK, there's a sort of grey area. The current legal status in this country is that the act of selling your body is not illegal, but solicitation, in other words paying money to have sex, is. And if British men are found curb crawling looking for prostitutes, they can be charged for that. It's a criminal offence. I believe the situation is similar in Sweden. In Sweden, the argument is that the men visiting the sex workers have the upper hand, and that's a justification for prosecuting them, that they have the upper hand in the situation. Now, this is an area I'd like to address specifically in regards to legalities. There is a stereotype about men who visit prostitutes, and incidentally I know there's male prostitutes, but speaking honestly, we're talking here about sex workers. Perhaps it's fair to say that the majority of people we are talking about are female sex workers. So when the context of this video, I'm talking about female sex workers. Yes, so the argument goes that men who visit prostitutes have the upper hand, and this sort of stems from a stereotype of the men who visit them. Often this stereotype is that the men are quite well off, or they're bad boys. There's one or two things: either they're sleazy businessmen who are cheating on their wives, or they are criminal thug types. The truth is, all sorts of men visit sex workers, and I believe there is significant socio-psychological issues involved in this. On the surface, of course, it's quite straightforward. These men want sex, but you have to ask yourself, why are they prepared to commit a criminal offence, i.e. in some countries solicitation is a criminal offence. Why would these men, who in many cases are in supposedly respectable jobs, be prepared to take that risk? Yes, they want sex, but I believe there's a major issue here which is undervalued. That is involuntary celibacy, or perpetual celibacy. These men clearly are going to a sex worker because they have reached a point where they cannot get sex any other way. Now, I take the view that intimacy, sexual intimacy, is a fundamental human right. And there'll be people watching this video will laugh at that, and they'll think, oh, is this guy saying that to go to a prostitute is a human right? Not exactly, I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is you have to look at the reasons why these men are doing this. Because it's a lot more complex, I believe, in many cases than, oh, they're just sleazy guys who are cheating on their wives. If they do have a wife or a girlfriend, I don't condone that behaviour. I think cheating is despicable. But there are men who visit sex workers who are single and who are doing it because it is the only way for them to have any sort of sexual connection. This is an issue that has to be looked at, and I believe that those who oppose legalising prostitution hugely undervalue this, and they hugely undervalue the sort of mental health consequences for people, especially men in that situation, who are suffering from perpetual celibacy. Not just the loneliness that comes with that, but the mental anguish, the emotional turmoil, frankly. You cannot underestimate it. This is an area that really, really needs to be explored much more, because it's all very well just portraying these men in a certain way. Another image that is often put out there about people who visit sex workers is that they're always violent and mistreat the sex workers. This is a massive distortion. Of course, there are some men that would. I'm not disputing that. But this is, in my line of thinking, is another reason why it should be legalised. And at this point, I'd like to weigh in on the perspective of the sex worker. I know there's been moves, for example, I believe in Amsterdam, which of course is famous for its sex industry, to make this illegal, whereby sex workers who actually have a trade union in that country have complained because it would mean a loss of income for them. It would be a loss of their livelihood. It goes without saying that this is one of the world's oldest jobs. And the fact of the matter is, if you, in situations where this has been illegal, and I would cite the Ipswich murders in the UK, this was a series of killings of sex workers about 5 years ago. In all of those circumstances, those women were in a very vulnerable position. 5 young women were killed. And in all of those situations, these were women who were in a vulnerable position. They were low-level prostitutes, they weren't in a secure location, and they ended up being the victim of this predator. I forget the guy's name, but I think it goes without saying that in situations where prostitutes have been subject to violence and rape and so on, it's been almost always in areas where they have been taking a risk. For example, back alleys, very sort of seedy locations. I'm not saying all the time, by the way, I'm not saying that's always the case, and any woman can potentially be a victim of those things. But the reason I think sex workers are much more subjected to it is because they have no choice but to go underground and they get involved with these sort of gangsters who run the business with an iron fist, pimps who control them, and so on. I believe if there was designated zones which were legal, which were highly controlled, i.e., you know who is going in, who's going out, there's a very clear sort of standard for, in terms of security. The men who go there know what they're going to get, the women who work there know what they're offering, and any threats of violence are dealt with. Now, I know that pimps often act as sort of security, but the problem is a lot of these pimps control these women with an iron fist. And I am not naive. There are very complex reasons why women choose to become sex workers, and it is wrong to say that to just base this on a choice factor. It's true that they're doing it by choice, but we also have to address the reasons why women get into this trade in the first place and to try to reduce that. Yes, it's often to do with drug habit, but in more sort of there are situations here with human trafficking and exploitation of young girls. In these sort of circumstances, there should definitely be prosecutions. This is an evil thing. It's basically a form of sex slavery when you have underage girls involved, as is sometimes the case, or when you get girls coming from Eastern Europe or the Far East to work as sex workers in Western cities. I honestly believe that those sort of situations should face prosecution for the people traffickers. I don't believe that men who visit sex workers should be prosecuted or face any sort of legalities, because they are themselves in a situation where they are clearly trying to escape a certain sort of life. They're trying to escape a life of celibacy in many circumstances. And what you're essentially saying, if you believe that it should be illegal, is that these men should be punished for the human desire of wanting to have sex. Now, I know one argument that's often made by opponents is, well, how would you like your daughter to be involved in this trade? Your sister or something like that. I don't have a daughter. If I did have a daughter, of course I wouldn't want her to be involved in that trade. I would do everything in my power to get her away from that. And yes, I would feel uncomfortable about men who were clients to her. But that's not the real world. In a perfect world, prostitution would not exist at all. But given that it does exist, I think if you have a choice between legalizing it and controlling the situation, or driving it underground, which is the current situation, which one produces more problems? Simply eradicating it completely is very difficult, because, for example, if you have private escorts, how on earth do you police that? If a man pays a woman for sex in her own house, how on earth do you police that? Unless she's an undercover policewoman. It's very difficult to police. And I don't think it should be policed. I believe that sexual intercourse is a fundamental human right. And for men who have no other way of getting sex, this is a way. Now, I know people will say, oh, I'm only looking at the men's perspective, what about the women involved in this trade? Like I say, in a perfect world, there would be a situation where involuntary celibates, perpetual celibates, don't have to resort to this situation, and where women who are in this sort of trade don't have to rely on drugs, or whatever is their motivation for doing this, being involved in this sort of lifestyle. I do not think prostitution is a good thing in itself, I don't. But I believe that because it does exist, you have to look at the options. You have to look at what is going to be the situation where the sex workers are most safe, most secure. And incidentally, I think it's ridiculous saying to these women, oh, you can sell your body, but we're going to prosecute the men that pay you. Because all that's going to do is put off men visiting them. Then they have no sort of livelihood, and then they just... It does not actually help their situation. I think the ideal situation would be to reduce the number of people suffering from perpetual celibacy and reducing the need for the sex trade. It's not a moral thing. I don't believe people should sell their body for sex, and I don't think that men should have to visit those women for that. But I do not judge people who do that. I don't judge the women who are involved in the sex trade. I don't judge the men who visit them. How can I? I don't know what their situation is. I don't know what their motivation is for doing it. So when people are very judgmental, it does make me angry when people treat sex workers like they're not real women. And there is a huge amount of prejudice against prostitutes, as if they're not real women, as if they don't have feelings, as if they don't... And part of that, I think, comes from the fact this is illegal, so it's seen as this very shady, dark world. I think I'm not proposing that it should be a family thing, it should be acceptable in that sense, but if it was illegal, that would break down a lot of the prejudice against sex workers, therefore, and I also believe increase their security. If you have designated zones, you could have that, people, licensed people, coordinating that, acting as sort of security. It would be a safe environment. If there's any threat towards the sex workers, the men involved can be expelled and arrested. But I think criminalising adult sex is not the business of government or the police. I just don't think that's... I can't see a moral justification for that. So I don't have the perfect answer how this would go about, but I do believe it has to be better than the current situation. The current situation is dangerous for sex workers, and I believe it's unfair on clients. I don't think those men are evil perverts, and I don't think they should be treated like that. I know it's socially taboo to talk about this, but perpetual celibacy is a major issue. I'm going to put this under a part 2.